Welcome everyone, no matter where you're from, where you're joining us. We are very happy to see everyone. Uh, we have a webinar that I'm excited about. We have two guests from Optimizely, Jeff Singh. Jeff, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you for having us here.
Absolutely. And Todd Seller. Todd, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So great to have you because this is something that a topic that constantly comes up, right, in modern applications. Um, our guest will show the webinar. As always, we'll have all the questions and answers at the end. And you can ask questions by going to a slider and using event code CYOPT, CYOPT. And you can even answer a poll right now. So Jeff asked me to include a couple of questions. As you can see, the question is already on the slide. You can use your mobile phone to scan QR code, get to the question, and do you know what feature flags are? Yes or no. So kind of allows our guests to kind of structure a webinar a little bit better, maybe skip a couple of slides. So I see people answering questions. Todd, do you know what feature flags are? I forgot to ask you guys this question.
No, I have absolutely no idea.
Okay, you learned something useful today.
Good, perfect. So take it away.
Excellent, excellent. So I see people answering the questions. Let me show the results. So right now, I don't know why it's not showing the results live. It's supposed to. Okay, now here we go. I think you are at the right place then, right? 75% of our audience knows what feature flags are. So that means this webinar will really be, targeted at the right audience. So with this said, Todd, why don't you take it away?
Let's see here.
Cool. Actually, I will actually kick it off really quick. Before we started, my name is Jeff. Thank you, Gleb, for introducing me. I am the QA manager at Optimizely. I run all the quality initiatives here. And with me is my cohort, Todd. Todd is, go ahead.
I'm Todd. I'm one of the QA engineers here at Optimizely, and I actually was charged by Jeff to first investigate Cypress and how we could integrate it into Optimizely. So really excited about this and to be here.
Perfect. So we're from the Bay Area, San Francisco, California. That's where Optimizely is based in. You can see my background. I have the Golden Gate Bridge. What we're here today to do is kind of give you a little bit of a history over how we discovered Cypress, what we use it for, and why is it great. And then kind of get into the bread and butter of some of the things that we're really testing right now, which is feature flags. And kind of automation strategy against feature flags and kind of some gotchas and some of the more high level things that we think, since 75% of you are using feature flags, that you should be aware of, and some cool things that Cypress can do to help you with these kind of feature flags. So let's kind of dive into it. Like I said, Optimizely is based in the Bay Area. For those of you that don't know us, Optimizely has kind of two big platforms. One is this experimentation platform, which allows our customers to do A/B/N testing, personalization testing, MVT, multivariate, and then some ML over the results, like stats acceleration. What our goal is we want to allow our customers to make data-driven decisions. And this means that, for example, you have a web page and you're not sure which button would make better signups, or which button would generate, or which image might generate better, engagement. So you can easily use Optimizely to create an experiment to test a button that says agree and join versus button that says I'll give you $100, and then track metrics and see, hey, if I choose this, which one will drive more signups and do the things that I desire? This allows our customers to really build the right product and build the product right. Our next product or platform that we do is something called progressive delivery. And what a progressive delivery platform is it allows our customers to do feature rollouts or feature flags and feature flag experiments. So for example, next slide, on our left panel here is kind of how we organize our feature flags. We allow you to kind of say what % traffic we want to put to your flag, what audience you want to target. And on the right side, we want you to say experimentation with your feature flags, right? Like, hey, what variation should your customer be in? What variation key, how to split that traffic, how to drive that results and kind of understand it. Now, I bring up this slide because it presents us QA engineers as an interesting problem, because not only do we have to make sure these features work for our customers, it's directly affecting the product, right? We're testing something. We need to understand if we're behind an experiment. We need to understand if we're in a feature or not in feature. Should we be in the feature? Are we in the right target audience? So this is kind of a unique problem that we face. So let's kind of dive into Cypress now. So why did we pick Cypress? Well, like most engineering organizations, we started off with Selenium. In fact, we had a very, very senior engineer who created this framework using Python, Behave. In fact, he didn't even call it Behave, he called it Behavely, which is his super special secret sauce Python framework. And it worked for a while, and then he left and it didn't work. It was very difficult to onboard. It's confusing. The logs were really terrible. Like I said, it was bespoke, so it cheated a lot. It stuffed a lot of information in. And as the application changed, the framework didn't, it started to fall apart. And no one wanted to maintain it, especially because front-end engineers are writing, JavaScript. They don't want to do Python. So eventually, it just took very, very long. Our pipeline took forever to run. That's probably our fault, but we just wasn't maintained. So eventually, a group of front-end engineers and QA engineers, including Todd, like he said, met up together to see, hey, what can we do to fix this? And someone brought up the fact that, hey, let's take a look at Cypress. Everyone's talking about it, and what can we do? So Todd was charged with generating a proof of concept to kind of say, hey, can we stand up Cypress? Can we run a bunch of suites to cover all the regression stuff that we're missing? And we can say apples to apples, does it do better? And what we found is yes, Todd and team was able to get Cypress to cover about, a good chunk of our regression tests that we're missing within a month or two. And we found that, hey, when things do go flaky, it was really easy to debug. We can easily find out why something was wrong. We have the video, we can see it, versus going to browser stack and trying to find it. And then in terms of speed, he was able to, parallelize test really fast. Like we were stand up Travis CI, he'll show you in a second. And we were able to cut down testing, like how long it took in pipeline by like over, I don't know what the percentage, but it was very fast. So I talked a lot, and I know that you're here not to listen to me talk. So I'm going to hand it off to Todd now to actually kind of go over why we picked Cypress, some cool things that we found. So Todd, take it away.
Thanks, Jeff. So one of the things that I really like about Cypress is the dashboard itself. And the great thing about it, especially when you are running in parallel, the dashboard makes it really easy to see which machine each test suite actually ran on. It also gives us one-click access to the output logs, screenshots if we have a failed test, and as Jeff mentioned, the all-important video. Our currently legacy system, which runs and records in browser stack, we have no idea which recording has which test case, so trying to find that failed test is almost impossible. So right now, virtually all of our debugging to determine whether or not the test is flaky or if it's a true failure is done strictly by the output logs. With the Cypress dashboard, I can easily come in, watch the recording, and determine, oh, no, it was just an environmental issue. Everything's fine, rerun the test case, and if it passes, we're good to go. Or determine, no, this actually is an issue, and we better file a bug. So it makes it really easy to do. The other thing that Cypress makes really easy is how you actually determine how to run it in parallel. So you can see here, we have Cypress integrated with Travis CI. So we've created this default script, which basically just passes in the parallel parameter. And so now this tells Cypress that, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and start to run these tests in parallel. And it will intelligently distribute the test cases to any machine that is running on a single stage and has the same test name. So in this case, we can easily spread it out. The other thing that makes it really nice about this is Cypress tells us then what is the optimum number of machines that we should have to maximize the efficiency. So when I first started doing the proof of concept, it was taking me over 28 minutes to run all of our tests because I wasn't running in parallel. The minute that I actually started to run that in parallel, it dropped down to 7 minutes. So we saw a 4x increase or decrease as far as the time to actually run these tests. So it was wonderful. The other thing that's great about Cypress actually managing the parallelization is that if a machine in Travis fails to spin up, we're not going to lose those test cases. Those test cases are still going to run because Cypress is only going to push test cases to the active machines. And that makes it really great. The other thing that we love about Cypress is its ease of use. So this is a great quote from Mike, who is our newest QA engineer. And his first task as a junior QA was to test our new integration with Salesforce. And so this posed a lot of challenges because it's using Optimizely directly within Salesforce and allows Salesforce users to create experiments to test on their dashboard and their configuration. And one of the things that Mike initially ran into was what happens when their normal login flow redirects across multiple domains. Because of course with Cypress, within a single test case, we can't cross domains. So he actually was able to figure out that if he sent an authentication token as a query parameter with the request, that it would bypass that redirect and that he could actually simply log in to Salesforce within the test itself. So that was great. And so this is actually the test suite that he created. And so we start off by testing the creation of an event within Salesforce. And now we actually start to create the experiment itself. So here we're creating the new experiment. And this allows us to actually create custom dashboards within Salesforce. And now we're going to add 2 variations. So this is the first variation, and then we add the second variation. But of course, experimentation means absolutely nothing if we're not generating and creating metrics. So here we're actually creating a new metric within Salesforce as well. We then validate that we can actually turn the experiment on within Salesforce. And then we finish it all up, going back into Optimizely to make sure that those experiments actually exist within the Optimizely dashboard and are in the correct state. So everything passed, and that was great.
Very nice.
So now we're going to send it back over to Jeff, and we're going to talk about feature flags.
Cool. So this next section really dives into a lot of the bread and butter of what we're testing right now. And that's, how do we automate tests against feature flags, what the strategy should be. So next slide, we have another survey. We want to know a bit more about, you guys. We asked about, question is, are you using feature flags right now? So let's see, amongst our participants here, how many people actually are testing against them or actually use them in production or have to deal with these.
And I kind of understand the question Jeff really wanted to ask right here. He was like, really wanted to ask, are you using Optimizely right now? I kind of see the split, right? So 50-50.
50-50.
Yeah.
Great.
That's great.
All right. So cool. Let's, yeah, it is really about a 50-50 split. Let's jump to the next slide, I guess.
Yes.
Cool. So I know 75% of you know what feature flags are, but for the other 25%, I want to make sure clear. Feature flags, or people call them feature toggles, feature switches, are a software development technique that turns on your feature on or off in production. This is important because if you can merge your code into master and it gets pushed into production behind a flag and it doesn't get exposed to anyone. And when you're ready, you can turn the flag on, you can turn the flag on to a certain percent, or you can turn it on to just a certain environment or customers and control that blast radius. You can see, hey, did it work? If it didn't, I can revert it. If it did, roll it all the way. And when I say blast radius, this is powerful because if I made a mistake, I can turn it off. And the mean time to restore is the time it takes for the switch to be turned off. I don't have to do a hotfix. I don't have to do a rollback. I don't have to rebuild the build, right? It's done. It's just fixed. So why is this kind of, if you look online, you'll see this is actually really powerful. In fact, every major company right now, from Amazon, Instagram, Facebook, for sure Netflix, is using something like this, right? They're slowly releasing their features out to a certain segment of their population, checking and make sure it's good, it works well, they're happy, and they slowly roll it out. Optimizely itself, like I said, we have over 100 plus active feature flags in our code base. That means at any point of the day, we're releasing code into production behind a feature flag. And as the QA team writing automation and in charge of testing, we have to have a coherent strategy to figure out how do we test that we haven't broken something? How do we get the signal to know that the feature flag actually worked, that the deploy worked, that we're releasing something safely, or else, you know, it's going to all crash tumbling. It's all going to come crashing, tumbling down. Finally,
Jeff, can I ask you on the last slide? It's very impressive. On the last slide, you have so many Canadian flags under features. What's that about? Is it geographic toggle?
So, one more time, what were you asking?
Why do you have so many Canadian flags on each feature?
Oh, this is an inside joke we have. Yeah, it's an inside joke. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I was saying is, not only do we have to worry about deploying behind these feature flags, Optimizely itself has 1,000 customers that last month alone used 8,000 feature flags to deploy. And a lot of times these customers will ask us, hey, you know, you sold us a product. How do we test that we're not blowing ourselves up? How do we test that this is working? What's your automation strategy? How does Optimizely figure out and build test cases and automation against this so we could adopt some of these practices and use it ourselves? So the next slide I have is, before I go into some of these automation strategies is, you know, for our attendees, do you guys test your feature flags? Like, do you have a great automation strategy? What do you guys do? We want to kind of hear from you guys first.
Yeah, see, this is a very interesting thing, right? Even if you use feature flags, you probably don't have a good testing strategy because there's so many combinations, so many permutations, right?
So wow, it looks it's about third split. Even within the testing and non-testing, it's about a 50-50 split.
Yeah. So that's it's good that you came as guest to this webinar and you did all this work to show how you're gonna test your feature flags.
I will say for the next session, before we kind of go on, even though we're giving you very optimizedly with Cypress examples, the things that we're talking about today apply to anyone, either a third-party vendor that you're using, or like if you have a bespoke version that you're in-house using. These are more high-level concepts that you should be thinking about and how to test against, rather than this is exactly, you know, a special tool that Optimizely does. So let's kind of jump to the next section. You know, I did notice about 50% of people here say no, they don't test feature flags. And the reason why probably is it's really hard, right? Feature flags by definition cause indeterminism. And anyone here who uses automation knows that test runners plus indeterminism is bad. You're gonna get flaky, it's gonna blow up, right? So in order to test feature flags, you really need to remove the concept of indeterminism, right? Your automation test runner needs to know exactly what you're testing against and exactly what you're asserting against. And in order to do this, you need to use some strategy, right? So we kind of tell you overall, hey, you need to remove that indeterminism using something like a special test user. You can pass the special test user to your test runner to Cypress, so it knows that, hey, I'm supposed to be testing this path, and these are what I should be asserting on, this is what I should be expecting. You can also use a test cookie or a test query parameter. Query parameters, you can also force Cypress to say, okay, I'm going to be in this path versus this path, so I know feature is on or feature is off. So I'm going to pass this off to Todd right now to kind of give you some examples of how we do this.
Great. So we actually found that it was easier to pass in a query parameter to be able to dictate what path we were actually testing. So I created an attribute, Cypress, and I basically set it equal on, and that tells me that I'm in the experiment itself. And then within my test runner, like in this case, I'm validating that the feature is not enabled. Now, technically, because the requirement is Cypress equals on, I don't actually need to pass this Cypress equals off query parameter, but it actually gives me kind of a second validation to validate that the audience condition itself is actually working as it's supposed to. And then when I need to test whether or not the feature is enabled, of course, I can just pass in the query parameter Cypress equals on. And so in this quick example with the feature off, we don't see our astronaut, but with our feature on, we do get our little astronaut. And so it just is an easy way to actually test and validate that you're in one path versus the other path.
And Todd, in a video, right?
Yeah.
Because URL is included in a video, you can actually see which experiment you're running, because it's a query parameter. It's like right there, Cypress is on. So it's very nice and debuggable.
And yeah, so it makes it really easy to know what state you're supposed to be in at any given point in time.
Cool.
Now we'll
Thanks,
pass
Todd.
it back to Jeff.
So that's pretty simplistic versioning of removing determinism versus non-determinism. And for the people that are already testing feature flags, you're probably already doing this, right? But what I see in the industry and what worries me with Optimizely for sure is that a lot of companies that are running automation against their feature flags are not considering feature flag types, right? Most people think, okay, I'm going to build some automation against on or off, you know, path A versus path B. But if you're just organizing your tests like this, you're going to be in trouble, because feature flags are actually, there's a lot of feature flag types and they're doing different things. And if you don't have a good strategy for each type and what they're supposed to be doing, then you're going to be not testing the right thing. Mm-hmm. So for example, at Optimizely, we have this concept of a short-term flag and a long-term flag. For a short-term flag, you know, we kind of talked about feature rollouts, right? This is how you can put code behind a flag in production and slowly roll it out. And then once it's out in GA in production, you're good to go. We at Optimizely insist that you remove these flags after X amount of days, exit criteria. The reason why is because if you don't remove these flags, your code base becomes brittle. Can you imagine if you had a critical feature that you give your customers and a year later, someone turns it off by accident and it's gone? That's an incident, right? In fact, you know, what if your developer that wrote it left a year later, right? And then you're building code on top of this feature flag. Your code base just gets brittle. Right. So a lot of our strategy around feature rollouts, deployments, is how do we make sure that, you know, we understand that we're testing both paths, but we have to deprecate one path. How do we make sure that we're testing the right variations? When should we be even writing automation against a feature rollout? On the other hand, we have our long-term feature flags. These are feature flags that will always be in our code base. We're not going to remove these because they are doing some kind of action for us that we need to. The three here I have is permission, operational, and circuit breaker. A permission feature flag is a feature flag that changed the product experiments based off certain users. For example, we have tiers, right? We're a software as a service. So customers that pay us in a higher tier get access to more features. Mm-hmm. Customers that pay us in a lower tier get access to less features. Automation here is really important because we need to make sure that as we introduce new features, introduce fixing features, we don't accidentally take away something from a user base, or we don't accidentally introduce something to a user base, or by making changes to a higher tier feature, we don't downstream break something. So the automation test really needs to understand the user perspective and how to test each layer. Second one I was talking about is an operational feature flag. Operational feature flags are feature flags that control operational aspects of our system. For example, we use something called feature variables in these feature flags to make certain changes. For example, our design team uses the operational feature flags to dynamically change the location of where, say, a banner is or source from. So this gives us the power to say, without deployment, the design team can put out a new banner, a new fav icon, right? We also, developers use this for example, we have a case where we can control the max number of calls to a certain service. This gives an ability to make changes dynamically depending on, you know, our system. Also, we use this to change certain algorithms for enriching data. while we're extracting certain data flows. And we understand that certain times, you know, in certain, like Black Friday, we have too much data and it's too costly. We're going to drop. So let's just turn this off, or we can change it what level we want to extract. So these are things that we use operational feature flags are. When we're testing this, we need to understand what the feature variable is doing, what it's operating on in our system, and the automation needs to check that specific piece, right? So we want to make sure if I make changes to it, it doesn't just explode. Mm-hmm. Finally, we have our circuit breaker, and our circuit breaker is basically it turns off or on certain features or conditions in our production environment. We use this to gate stuff like our third-party vendors like New Relic, Segment, Sumo Logic. And this is, you know, if something were to go wrong with our vendors, we can turn them off and there's no harm, no foul. Or we can turn off certain features. Like I said, like operational, we may want to turn off logging, for example. We want to turn off, you know, enrichment. So testing really needs to be, you know, turned on and turn off and how we handle that. Cool. So I think I'm going to hand this off to Todd. I think Todd, is he still here or did he get kicked off?
It's hard for me to say because I don't see his video stream. Do you want to control the screen?
Yeah, let me see if he, yeah, I can control the screen. Give me a second. All right. So, let me see. Okay, cool. So let me go back a few slides. Apologies, I'm gonna do my best impression of Todd. Somehow he just got kicked off. But really Todd is our, you know, engineer that does this. He knows Cypress way better, but I will do my best impression of him. So
we'll manage.
So rollouts, like I talked about earlier, we want to test both, you know, on and eventually this is maybe put into production. But once the feature is 100% out, we want to deprecate the off, but we don't necessarily want to delete those tests. And what Cypress does a really good job with is it allows us to have, you know, these folders to organize test cases, and we can kind of move our test cases into these folders, and eventually we can remove them. But the cool thing about this is, you know, in Travis CI, it lets us kind of, oh, look at this, saved me. Hey, Todd.
I'm sorry, I lost internet.
Okay, I was doing a terrible impression of you. I just got to your slides about rollouts. You want to take it from here so I don't steal your thunder?
Sure. So as far as rollouts are concerned, I think Jeff probably mentioned that obviously we need to check both paths, whether you have the flag on, whether you have the flag off. Also, you need to continue to validate both paths until the feature has been fully adopted and the flag actually has been removed from your code base. But with so many flags in various states of development and deployment, the question really comes down to how do you maintain these two sets of test cases, especially once the flag has been rolled out to 100%, or the feature has been rolled out, but the flag itself hasn't actually been removed. And so with Cypress, it makes it pretty easy. What we've done is we've added a deprecated folder. So once that feature is at 100%, we can go ahead and move the flag off test case into this deprecated folder. This allows us to periodically run these test cases because we don't have to spend the time to run them every single. What the ability to do is, oh, my internet is unstable. Let me make sure here. Actually, I don't think I can control.
You should be. It says you control. There might be a
yeah,
slight
it says
delay.
I'm controlling, but
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, let's see here. Oh, there we go. All right, we are back. All right. So,
Oh, do you want to turn off the video just in case? You might be able to save some bandwidth. Sorry.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the joys of being tethered to your phone.
It's not a big deal. We all experience Wi-Fi problems, so I apologize to all listeners, but I'm sure we'll get through this.
Yes. Okay. There we go. We're just going to have to control it through the mouse. So sorry about that. But actually, one of the great things, again, with Cypress is we can actually send in a configuration variable and change which test folder is actually running at any given point in time. So this allows us to choose whether or not we want to run those deprecated tests. And we can continue then to run our other tests as normal. The other flag type that we have is permission flags. And at Optimizely, we use permission flags throughout the product. This allows us to easily control what features users have access to.
Oh man.
What we've done is within our monolith code, we have a create test account handler. So within Cypress, we actually created a custom command, create account, and now we can pass in the configuration for any account type or user permission that we actually want to create. What's great about custom commands as well is it gives you a way to actually organize your code. So here you can see I actually have 2 additional custom commands within this create account command. And so it makes it really easy to determine what we're doing and just make the code clean. So for instance, we have a product, free rollouts, which Jeff has talked about. And within free rollouts, users can create an unlimited number of feature flags and deploy behind those feature flags. But we've now actually just added the ability for those users to test into search algorithm. And so you can validate that the new search algorithm actually converts and has a higher return on sales than your previous search algorithm. Right now, rollout users are limited to having 1 feature test running at a time, but our full stack users actually still have the ability to create and run multiple feature tests. So we had to create a test around this scenario. So in this case, using our create test account, I'm creating a custom rollout account, and then I'm starting to test and validate that the user can only run 1 feature test at a time. So here we have 1 running feature test. And now we try and start another one, and we get the pop-up saying no. So now we're running the exact same test, but running it against a full stack user. And here we need to validate and make sure that we actually can create and run both feature tests.
Nice.
And now we're going to start another one, and it starts up and runs. So now we know that in this case with our permission flag, the expected behavior happens for both the free rollout account as well as our full stack users. The third flag type, or second long-term, is our operational flags. And with our operational flags, for instance, our free rollout account actually is not only a permission flag, but it uses an operational flag. So we're using a variable that actually determines how many test cases a user can run at any given point in time. Right now it's set to 1, but in the future, we could actually run a feature test to see if we get more engagement by allowing users to run more feature tests around the default variable. In this example, just learn more on the button. Or we have the blast off in this example. And so again, in our test case, we're going to do the exact same thing. So when the feature is not enabled, or we're not passing in our test audience query parameter, we should have the text learn more. When we do have our query parameter, then we should see the text blast off. So again, this is a way that we can easily test within Cypress both paths very easily. The last type of flag that we have is circuit breaker. And although I probably missed all of Jeff's eloquent description of a circuit breaker test while I was frantically trying to get back online, I'm sure he told you that one of the things that we use our circuit breaker tests for are to validate that if a third-party integration were to go down, that we can easily turn that integration off and not stop the use of our product. Surprisingly enough, we actually do the same thing with our own product. We have our fourth product, which we call program management, which exists as a separate standalone service outside the Optimizely monolith. Yet we still like to actually run experimentation. So on the off chance that Optimizely ever actually went down, we have a circuit breaker test that basically would allow us to quickly turn off the Optimizely snippet, and so users still would be able to actually use the program management. So here we have our circuit breaker test where we're validating that the script exists within the head of the document when the feature is on, and then not passing in the audience condition to validate that it doesn't exist. And now back to Jeff.
We did it, Todd, without you having good internet. So I'll take it from here. We covered a lot of high-level things that we do test and how we kind of go about these. What we didn't cover is things that you should not test. And part of what we tell our customers when we talk about QA strategy is, you know, here are some great things to think about, but at the same time, here are things that you really shouldn't write automation for. These kind of go back to our short-term flags, flags that we want removed. We have a flag type called experimentation. And these are our flags that we can run our A/B test, our feature test. We don't write automation for these. And the reason why is because we may be experimenting on something called a painted door, or like, for example, press this if you want free apples. But in reality, we're not giving you apples. We just want to see how people want it. And if people actually want it, then we might have to build that apple dispenser. So a lot of times there's nothing to test against. These are just proof of concepts. These are just ideas that we want to check to see. Or we're not sure. Maybe someone built something and we're not sure if this is going to be adopted. So the ROI of actually writing your automation test against this is terrible. Right. The other thing that we look at is non-critical variations, right? It could be your feature test, maybe what you're putting in there is not critical, or that the off is not critical, or that you may have multiple feature flags nested in different areas, and the areas in between certain on-off scenarios shouldn't be tested because it just doesn't make sense. Maybe if it does go wrong, the customer impact's low, it's very hard for the customers to get into that impact, or in general, you have a good strategy to get yourself out. In that case, you have to ask yourself, what's my ROI, and does it make sense to even build against that? So that's kind of the things that we definitely suggest you don't test. So next slide, Todd. Or yeah. So what's next? Well, we talked a lot about strategies over how to test, but in reality, everything we've kind of said is just, you know, hey, you kind of got to just tell your test runner what to run. You have to know that you're going to be in variation A or variation B or feature on or feature off, and your test runner kind of has to do that. And that's kind of unfortunate. That's not smart. So what we have at Optimizely is we have something called agent service, which our customers can put into their microservice infrastructure, which has Optimizely. And this agent service already knows things like, is my feature enabled? Is my feature off? What's my feature variables? Or better yet, I want to be in this feature, force bucketing, right? So what we're working on at Optimizely to give to our customers that are using Cypress or different frameworks is the third-party library to talk to Cypress and to the agent service to say, my test runner is going to run. I want to be in this variation. I want to be in this feature. Put me in. I want to test against this feature variable. Get it for me. And it's smart enough to be able to say, okay, I'm going to deliver this. I'm going to deliver what you're testing against to move it into that state to be able to do that. So that's kind of what's next and what we're looking for in the next few quarters.
So just so I can understand myself better, instead of query parameters, the test will just make a request to the agent service from Optimizely saying, I want to turn feature A, B, C, and turn off feature D, for example.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
And that's it. Okay, so one source of ground truth. Gotcha.
Exactly. So the test Cypress itself doesn't have to, is smart enough now to know, okay, now that I know I'm in feature A, these are the things that I'll be asserting against. This is the experience that I'm testing, rather than Cypress, you should be testing this and looking for this.
Right. Gotcha.
Perfect. So the next slide. Okay, perfect. So that's it. We want to thank you for coming. We're really interested in always hearing more about your testing stories or what gotchas you have. If you have any questions about feature flags or how to think about it, my email and Todd's email is here. I promise you Todd's internet is not always this bad, so he'll probably reply. Also, a lot of what we talked about today is applicable to any feature flag system. However, you know, I have to do my due diligence and say we do have a free feature flag version where you can create unlimited feature flags and some feature experiments. We actually created a bespoke link down there. It's optimize.ly Cypress webinar. If you're curious, want to play with it, it's free. Go ahead and try it out. And I think now we're going to go into some questions and answers.
That's right. Thank you, Jeff and Todd. And we definitely have questions from the audience. So Jeff and Todd, is there any question from these upvoted questions that catches your eye that you would like to answer?
Todd,
so, yeah, I see the first one, the do you keep Cypress and your main app in the same repo? And the answer is no. Cypress actually exists within its own repository in this respect. It mainly was just because it initially was a proof of concept, and it just kind of made it easier. That's changing. Internally, we've actually made the decision to sunset our legacy testing, and we will be moving 100% to Cypress for our end-to-end test suites. So I'm not quite sure, but I doubt it. And one of the main reasons for it is we're trying to dismantle our monolith and have individual microservices. So
excellent.
And then I see, did you look at Docker for running tests in parallel? We actually at Optimizely use Quay to host our Docker images. It was something that I initially looked into, but because it was easy enough to just run outside of a Docker image, that I went the easy path for the proof of concept. So we may go back to running the tests within Docker images, especially as we move more to our microservices.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And then we have, are your tests triggered when you deploy or every time you deploy a new version, or are your Cypress tests triggered manually on demand? We're in the process of integrating Cypress into our pipeline. Initially, it's going to be non-blocking. So it will run with every deploy. But currently, as we stand right now, it's triggered on a cron job. So we're running every day in our development environment.
Gotcha.
And do you guys test multivariants also on variants along with Crossbrowser? Say feature A, Chrome off, Firefox off, feature B, Chrome off, Firefox on. At this point in time, I actually haven't started to use cross-browser testing, mainly because the majority of our users actually are in Chrome. Fortunately, Cypress just recently added the ability to test cross-browser, which is great that we now actually have that option. The other thing that we have to kind of look at as far as our testing is this kind of goes back with feature flags. Are there certain test cases that we don't want to test again? Yeah, because potentially we're writing so many test cases. Does it really even make sense, especially if it's a short-term flag?
Right.
So it just, I think, really depends on the test on how we're going to move forward with the cross-browser testing. And then, is parallelization supported with hosted build agents in Azure DevOps? This is probably more of a Gleb question.
I believe you can do it, but you have to look at Azure DevOps CI documentation in order to see how to run multiple agents in parallel. But if you can, then our parallelization flag will take care of actual splitting the specs. What Todd has shown in Travis CI YAML file comes pretty much straight from our documentation and our examples. So look at existing CI docs, look at Azure DevOps docs, and I'm sure it will work out.
Yeah, that was another thing that I didn't necessarily mention that I should have, as far as one of our reasoning for choosing Cypress was just how strong the documentation actually is and how it makes it incredibly easy to figure out how to do a lot of these things. So that's great.
Thank you.
So how do you make sure developer does not merge something behind a flag, which will not trigger CI fails, then turn them on in production? It's pretty tricky right now. Proof of concept and kind of be the stopgap as far as our current test suite where it has deficiencies. So we haven't run into most of this right now, mainly because it's regression. The majority of our current test cases are regression. As we move forward, I think the difference that we have is QA will not be the only people contributing to the Cypress framework. Our developers will be writing the test cases as they do now while they're developing these features. So hopefully we would never be in a state where a flag was merged that we didn't have some sort of testing behind that just all of a sudden turned on.
I say, you have to use code reviews when you merge test and code, and maybe try to see if a new feature flag has corresponding tests and not allow, code to be merged without corresponding tests.
I will say we do have a governance system where our PRs for feature flags are linked to our governance system, which is in Jira. So we know when a flag's coming out. And generally speaking, we have, the QA organization has a pretty good audit checklist to say, hey, I noticed that you're preparing to move your code into production and you're about to turn it on. Did you follow this list? And we've been pretty good about this, and that's kind of prevented a lot of the issues. At the same time, though, we rarely see a deploy behind a feature flag where we just rip it to 100%, right? We really believe in stage deploys. So we'll raise it to a certain percent, and then we'll check the logging, we'll check the results to make sure that we didn't blow something up. And we've made mistakes where it wasn't tested correctly, or someone just got it in, turned it on. But we've seen that hey, it triggers something in Segment, it triggers something in New Relic, or a customer says something, and we're able to turn it off so fast that we're able to kind of respond quickly.
That's a very good observation. Why don't we take 2 more questions so we finish right on time, right? Because we covered a lot of ground. The question that Todd, I think, kind of answered is Optimizely one big monolith, but you said you are looking to split it up, right?
Yeah. So It currently is a monolith. New features that we're developing as microservices. So we will be actually integrating Cypress within kind of, we have well, it's actually called Blueprint, which is the project. And it essentially will be kind of a self-contained microservice that developers will be able to spin up and develop against for new features that then will integrate into the monolith itself. And Cypress will be included within Blueprint. And so that's kind of how we'll split it out. So.
Thank you. And one last question, and I promise that we'll go for the questions later and we'll try to answer the questions, both Jeff, Todd, and I. So whoever asks the question, it's not going to disappear. But I picked this question because I think this gives Optimizely a nice kind of last shot at explaining something that always was of interest to me. All right. Jeff, do you mind taking this one?
Sure. So we built kind of a system to be able to govern and monitor. We have concepts of states, not just types, right? So for our short-term flags, they go through certain states: testing, rollout, production, and then remove state. We work with product and our engineers to have contracts between how to get into each state and how to get out. So the question before, like, what happens if developer cheats and just check something in? Well, they still have that contract. We know they're coming out and we know what to expect to remove back, which is our risk contract. We also have a contract saying what's our exit criteria. So once our short-term flag hits that exit criteria, it triggers a job for us and we know, okay, these flags need to be removed. So we move them into the remove flag state, and different teams use different mechanisms. Some use a queue to take the flags out. Some require us to go in there and put them into like a feature flag removal day, either way, or a flag jail. But we use these contracts and these states and these triggers to kind of move you into different buckets so we know, okay, it's time to come out.
Gotcha. Now, I assume that you have best practices and great documentation, right?
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Todd and Jeff, for the time that you spent. I'm going to go back and show the link to the slides one more time and the link to the Cypress webinar with Optimizely, free version of Optimizely. So take a screenshot of the links. Thank you very much, Jeff and Todd, and thank you, viewers, for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, learned something useful, and you can apply this in your day-to-day work life. So stay safe and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.